Hi there, welcome to Education Cafe Canada. My name is Shari and I am a retired special education specialist and guidance counselor. Today on the menu, I am talking about programming for students who have ADHD. So this video is really geared to teachers, but I think both parents and students will find it beneficial. So before you forget, please subscribe, give us a thumbs up if you think the video is great. And be sure to stay till the end, especially if you're a new teacher, because I give some great classroom tips that have really worked for me. Today I'm going to talk about programming for students with ADHD, or more specifically, what worked for me in the classroom as a special education specialist and teacher. Now, every student is different, every class is different, so what I'm giving you are my experiences, and hopefully you can use them directly or you can tweak them to work in your classroom. Now, if you watched my first video of the introduction to ADHD, you will know that I'm a firm believer that anyone who has ADHD needs to do two things at once. And that is because people who have ADHD have very fast-moving minds. And if they're only focusing on one thing, they can easily get bored and get distracted. But if you have two things going on at the same time, you will generally keep them much more engaged. And once I figured that out, it really changed the way that I approached my teaching. Okay, so first, just a little bit of background. Originally, ADHD was considered to fall under the umbrella of behavioral exceptionalities. As we learned more about ADHD and realized it was a neurodivergence, then it was removed from that category, but it didn't really fit into any other categories. So very often, simply saying you have ADHD does not get you special education supports. Your ADHD has to manifest in a behavioral problem or a learning challenge of some kind, and very often it does. But I do want to give you that sort of background information so that you know it if it ever comes up. So keeping all of this in mind, what you want to do is control what you can control. And as a teacher, generally speaking, if you have your own classroom, that is your physical environment. Now, when I've said in the past that ADHD was considered to be a behavioral exceptionality, that doesn't mean these kids were violent or that they, are going to hit other students, or, I mean, they might, but chances are that's not what they're referring to. Usually it's the student is calling out. They're distracting or taking the focus from the lesson. They're getting up and moving around. They're doing all those fidgety things that students who have ADHD and have extra energy to burn off tend to do. So when you're looking at controlling your environment, let's start with the walls. They do not have to be totally blank. You can put up things like artwork, the student's artwork. You could put up things that are related to your lessons, or they could be things that you would want to use as teachable moments. I mean, one thing that I always have up in my classroom are my class rules. No, I don't have a lot of class rules because most of those are in the school policies, or if they still give out agenda books, or what have you. Your students can have it in that. I have two simple rules. One is if you insult somebody, you have to apologize. And the other one is that you don't take things that aren't yours without permission. Pretty simple. And then I also put the consequences. So the first time a student insults another student, all right, they have to write an apology letter. Inevitably, the student who is insulted will tell you they don't need it, it's okay. My response to that is the apology letter is for me because I am offended having to listen to that. Okay, and the second time they do it, and actually in all honesty I rarely even get to 2 times, but the second time they'll write an apology letter and they'll have a detention. And then the third time I look at which one I think the student will hate most, either going to the office or the call home. So those are the 3 things that are listed. Everybody knows what's going to happen if they do something. Okay, so now that your walls are under control, basically if your student is going to be looking around the classroom, they're going to see something that is related to the lesson. You can address briefly, you can have a teachable moment, and you can redirect the attention back. The second thing that you can control in your class are your desks and chairs, and of course where your desk is located. But very often teachers move around the classroom, so your desk is not really as important. Now, if you are a high school teacher like I was, and you have different students coming in for each period, it is actually worth your while to change the seating arrangement if it merits it. So take the 5 minutes to move them into groups, move them out of groups, or what have you, because in the end, you will save time by not having to address certain problems that can arise from having the wrong seating plan, to be perfectly honest. So, some examples. Very rarely do you see classes now that are straight rows, but that does happen. So keep in mind, if you have a student who is acting up, a student who has ADHD, or actually any type of behavioral issue, if you are in rows, your student can, let's say they were kids who hit, they can hit the person in front of them. They can hit the ones at the either side of that. They can hit the ones on either side of them. If they are flexible, they can hit the diagonal behind those two and the one directly behind them. So now you have about 10 kids. I didn't teach math, okay? So you have all of those students who that student can get to before you can intervene. So if you had, like I had 1 year where I had every grade 9 behavioral problem student in my class, what I did in that class was I would use a horseshoe formation. And if it's a larger class, it would be like 1 or 2 or 3 rows. And my reasoning for that was that they could only really get to the students on either side of them without me intervening. If they really wanted to hit somebody across the room, I could intervene before they could move and get out there. Like as soon as you see the movement, you're already moving towards intervening. So that is something to consider. And, you know, like I said, if you have students who can be challenging, it is so worth your while to change the seating, because some kids work best in a group. And you maybe have a group of, 4, 6, 8 students all working together, and that class runs beautifully. But the next class, you have a student who, tends to get up and move around, or tends to bother other students, or what have you. Maybe putting them into the horseshoe formation is going to work best. You have to know your students to know what kind of seating arrangement works best, and then implement it. Okay, so the number one concern for any teacher, any classroom, anywhere in the school is safety. That is what we have to look at first. That is the only non-negotiable. You can't have something that's not safe going on in your classroom. Or, if it's something like a science experiment that could go awry, you can, have something in place in case it's a problem. But for the most part, your everyday classes, you want to make sure everybody is safe. Okay, and that is why I always have my rules on the wall. And again, I should have said, treat everybody with respect. It's a little bit more encompassing. And of course, do not touch anything that's not yours without permission. And I have those consequences, because that way, like I said, anybody knows if they act up what's going to happen. And also nobody can say, oh, but last month when Tommy did that, you did this, and now you're doing this with me, and that's something different, and what have you. You don't want to have to deal with that nightmare. So just go with the consequences and take it from there. If the student is really being malicious, then I will make them read the apology letter out loud. But for the most part, its first one is an apology letter, and I have a folder for each student, and I have their apology letter in that folder. Then the second one, of course, again being that you do the apology letter and you get a detention, and then the third one, either a call home or you're going to the office. And that, for the most part, will actually keep your class pretty much under control, because as long as you follow that, they know that that is what's going to happen. It's when you kind of waver and make exceptions, that's when you're going to lose control of your class. So just to be clear, a person who has ADHD, in my experience, has a very fast-moving mind. So telling them to, quote, pay attention is not going to slow that down, nor is saying this is an important lesson, because if it's not important to them, they are going to get distracted. Really what you need to do is have two things going on at once, because otherwise that extra energy is going to be manifesting as fidgeting, moving around the classroom, speaking out, or just daydreaming. In order to keep your student focused, you want to have two things going on at any time. One is what you want them to know or do, and the second is something that is mindless, that uses up that extra energy. So for the secondary thing you want students to do, I'll start with the younger students. One thing that I would see is putting Velcro under that sort of lip of the desk so that they can run their hands over it. Of course, we're all pretty well familiar with fidgets. That's a possibility. Before that, there used to be stress balls. And of course, they come in different shapes. I like the one that was shaped like a star. That's me. One thing to keep in mind, especially with older students, is that those stress balls can be a weapon, and they're a little painful. So make sure you know your audience if you're using one of those sort of stress balls. Those balancing chairs, sort of, like the big balls that you would see at the gym. Students can sit on them, and having to balance themselves can be their secondary thing. And then finally, if your school has the budget, which I've never worked in a school that had the budget for this, but I do know it exists, exercise bicycles or sort of pedaling. And so what you're doing is you're burning off that extra energy that they have so that they can stay focused. Okay, so let's talk about high school now. High school students, traditionally, any kid who's in special education, but generally in speaking, you will find they have a lot of difficulty taking notes. So I just got rid of that problem by giving a handout every class that had all the key points. That way they always knew what they could study from, and so on and so forth. So all they had to do was listen. Now the problem is, of course, now I need a second thing for them to do. And what I would do was find a mindless activity. And very often in my classroom, it was coloring. I would actually find something online that was related to my lesson, and my students would sit and color while I was talking. And that was mindless enough that they could focus on the lesson, they could ask questions, and everything stayed nice and calm. You do have to give a grade for the coloring. Of course, it doesn't have to be very high, like maybe the whole week's of coloring is worth 1 mark or what have you, but students will not do things if they do not think they're going to get a grade for it. Something about handouts when you want them to do work. Always have lines on your handout. Spend that extra moment or a few minutes and make lines under the questions for tests, for what have you. It gives them an idea of how much space they have to use, so how long their answer has to be. It gives them the ability to keep their lines somewhat straight so you can read them. Okay, that's important. Also, always hole punch your paper, because otherwise you're going to end up with this massive lineup of students, because likely you have only one hole punch in your class, and now you've wasted about 10 minutes of your class time just getting things punched. And in fact, what I would very often do is once a week, I would take 10 minutes at the end of the class to make sure we organized everything. My students had everything in binders, and they had a table of contents, because I always had open book tests, because I was not testing their memory, I was testing their knowledge. And what they would do is they would take that handout, they would put a date on it, they'd put it in their table of contents, and they would keep everything in order. This also saved you from having those rolled up balls of paper at the bottom of their backpacks. And something that you can do is put anything important on colored paper. It's also known as color coding. So for example, they have an assignment that's due. I might photocopy that on blue or on goldenrod or on green or what have you, so that they can easily find it in their backpacks or in their binder, ideally. All right, so another thing that I would do in my classroom is I would consider sensory aspects. And what I mean by that is, keep in mind, not all students who have ADHD are medicated. Some of them aren't taking the medication. If they are medicated, as they are growing, their medication needs change, so they may not have been to the doctor to get it changed and what have you. So for a variety of reasons. You could have students whose medication is not accurate or who are not taking it at all. And we are teachers, not doctors, and I certainly have no opinion one way or the other whether you choose to medicate a child. Well, the teachers can't do that. Whether the parents choose to medicate or not, that is something that you decide with your doctor, with your family situation, and so on. But there are certain scents that can actually calm students down. One, oranges, and I talked about this in my previous video introducing ADHD. I'm not sure what it is about oranges. Oranges are great. Orange juice, orange scent, oranges themselves. They are great for calming students down. They actually can boost students intellectually. So there are some places, other countries, sorry off the top of my head, I don't know which ones, but they actually would not allow students to have orange juice before a test or midway through if it was a long test and they had a break, because they felt it gave an advantage. So take that information as you will. So other scents that can be useful, if you have somebody who's allergic to oranges or what have you. Sorry, I'm very itchy. Lavender and vanilla. And in my classroom, I always had one of those little jars of vanilla essence. And, every so often, especially if they asked me a question I didn't want, they came up and I would, with the vanilla to entertain them. I have a comedy background. Okay, but I've digressed. Natural lighting is really great. It's a little bit more controlled, so that's nice. If you have a lot of noise in your classroom, you can look at using hushes, which are basically tennis balls that have had an X cut into them, and you put them on the foot of the chair, or desks, I suppose, if desks are moving a lot. And it just keeps things quieter. Another thing you can do, and this is more often used with students who have hearing challenges, but so classes that are actually designated for students who are deaf or hard of hearing. But if you have horrible sounds coming from outside, like lots, I shouldn't say necessarily horrible, there could be lots of just loud sounds. You can, of course, put pillows in there, and so that can just control noise to a certain extent, if that is impacting your class. I have never had to do that. I've never had to use hushes, but I do want to mention them because you may need them. Who knows? And try and keep your visual clutter down, because again, that's like, oh look, over there, a pair of scissors. You don't want to have all those different focal points. You want to keep your focal points in your classroom as controlled as possible so that your students with ADHD can actually focus on the lesson. Having students who have ADHD in your classroom can be absolutely wonderful. Perhaps I'm biased because I have ADHD, but I find that they bring such an energy to your classroom. It's engaging for students. It's a creative classroom. It's a dynamic classroom. Students want to come to class because they never know what's going to happen. Because, of course, your students will go off on tangents. This is to be expected. That is why you're controlling what's on the walls, so that you can keep somewhat control over where those tangents are going to be and how you can make them part of your lesson. But certainly don't be someone who's panicking because you've got students who have ADHD. I once had a class where I had 12 students with ADHD and no medication. And that was like a class of 25, but it was a very dynamic class. It was certainly kept me on my toes. It kept me awake. I mean, it's certainly a class I remember, and I've taught many, many classes, obviously, in 20 odd years of teaching. So never look at it as a negative, because it isn't. You can really work well with your students who have ADHD, and they can add so much to your class as long as you learn how to set boundaries for them. I'm not going to say control them, because you never want to control other people, but you want to control the outbursts. You want to be able to control what's going on with their tangents and so on. Now, before we close, I just want to say, if you're in a situation where a student is adamant they are not going to do something that you want them to do. So, for example, your student refuses to do the assignment that the class is doing. and your student is in front of you and they say, no, I'm not doing it, and you're saying, yes, you're going to do it, you're at a standstill. That student does not want to lose face in front of their friends, so they will not back down. You cannot lose control of your classroom, so you can't back down. What you do in that situation is you give them two options. One option is, of course, what you want them to do, and the second option is something you don't think they want to do, whether it's go to the office, it's have a detention, it's clean the floor of your classroom, if that won't get you in trouble, or what have you. Because once you give them two and only two options, it's like, well, I don't want to go to the office, so okay, fine, I'll do the homework or I'll do the assignment. All right, that is how you're going to control. It's not very often you're going to have a student who has ADHD who is, I don't know, behaves in that way. I mean, it can happen with any student, but it's not a norm. Let's put it that way. Okay, so for those new teachers out there, I am not going to deny that teaching students who have ADHD can be a little overwhelming at first, and that's because you're not used to working with students who have ADHD, basically. But design your classroom so that you have control over that environment. Make routines and lesson plans that work to their strengths, and you will find that everything will work out just fine. Now, if you are a new teacher, there are a couple of books that I'm going to recommend, and they will be down below. If you use those links, I get like a couple of pennies from Amazon for it, which helps support the channel. One, you might get them from the library. You don't have to necessarily buy them, but they will be useful, so you might want to buy them. One is, and they're old, sorry, I should say that. One is Theater Games for the Classroom by Viola Spolin. And the second one is Practical Ideas That Really Work for Students with ADHD. There is a whole series of books called Practical Ideas That Really Work for, and then there's a number of different things they work for. Many of them have overlapping with the ideas. They are very good, but you don't have to go out and buy all of them. So think about your student population and which one would work best for you, and I would recommend buying that, or even better, getting your school to buy it. But that's just something that I recommend and I found work, because tools matter and understanding matters more. And once you have both, well, hey, that's a recipe for success, isn't it?